Hello.
I'll never forget the day it all started to unravel. It was one of those regular afternoons, you know? Came back from a long day at the site, smelling like dirt and sweat, looking forward to just chilling with my kid and catching up on whatever Netflix show Lisa had on. Little did I know, my whole life was about to take a nosedive. So I walk in, and my little girl Jessie comes running up with this big old grin, talking a mile a minute about her day. She starts off about the games they played, her new stuffed animal, the usual, right? But then she says something that makes me stop dead in my tracks. "Daddy, today we played hide and seek with the other daddy too." I couldn't have heard that right. So I crouch down laughing a little and say, "What do you mean, the other daddy, Jess?" And she just shrugs, like it's no big deal, and goes, "The other daddy who comes here when you're at work. He's funny, Daddy. He says I'm his little secret." I don't even know what to say to that. I just smile and tell her to go play while I take off my boots. But inside, man, I was spinning. I told myself maybe it was nothing, maybe she was just talking about some imaginary friend or something. But deep down, I had this gut feeling, like a rock settling in my stomach. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. Every little thing I'd brushed off before was coming back, but now it had this darker angle to it, you know? Like how Lisa started dressing up a bit more on random days. I mean, nothing crazy, but suddenly, she'd be putting on perfume just to run errands or do a Target run. Or how she'd be on her phone a little too much when she thought I wasn't looking, always turning the screen away if I got close. Small stuff, but when you're suspicious, every detail feels like it's screaming at you. And Jesse's words just kept playing in my head on a loop. "The other daddy says I'm his little secret." By the next morning, I knew I couldn't just ignore it. So I decided to look around the house a bit when Lisa wasn't there. She'd be out doing whatever she said she did when I was at work, and I'd have the place to myself. My plan was simple: start with her phone if she left it behind, and then see if I could find any other hints. It was probably the worst feeling in the world, needing to dig around in my own home like some kind of paranoid detective, but I couldn't shake it. A few days later, I got my chance. Lisa took Jessie to a playdate at a friend's house, leaving her phone behind, charging on the kitchen counter. Now, I don't want you thinking I'm the type to snoop around by default. I trusted her, or at least I used to. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd never gone through her stuff before, but my gut told me I had to know. When I picked up her phone, my hands were shaking. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I started scrolling through her messages and social apps. And then I found them, messages to some guy named Tommy buried in her DMs, hidden in the archive. It wasn't much, but I saw just enough to get the picture. The inside jokes, the "see you soon" winky face messages, the way she'd tell him about her free days. The worst part was reading about Jessie. There it was in black and white. "You know she loves you, right? She calls you her other daddy now." That was the punch in the gut. This wasn't just some fling. She'd brought him into our daughter's life, under our roof, in my own home. And all the while, I'd been working my tail off to give us a good life, to make sure Jessie had everything she needed. The whole thing felt like a sick joke, like I'd been the last to know in my own damn family. But I wasn't about to lose my temper, not yet anyway. I needed proof, real proof, something that couldn't be twisted around or explained away. So I put her phone back exactly as I found it, took a deep breath, and started forming a plan. That night, I could barely look at Lisa without feeling this anger bubbling up inside me. She was going on about her day, her plans for the weekend, maybe throwing in a few complaints about house chores, usual stuff. But to me, every word sounded fake. I smiled, nodded, played along, all while trying to act like I hadn't just uncovered her little secret. Over the next couple of days, I did some research. I found out about these tiny hidden cameras, easy to set up, and decided to put a few around the house. Not in obvious spots. No, I wanted them to catch her in the act without any chance of her noticing. One went in the living room, hidden behind a photo frame on the shelf. Another in the kitchen, up on top of the fridge where it could get a clear view of the back door. And yeah, I even put one in our bedroom. I felt sick to my stomach setting that one up, but if I was going to get to the bottom of this, I couldn't afford to hold back. I told myself I was doing this for Jessie. If Lisa was lying to me, she was lying to her too. And that other daddy crap? There was no way I'd let some guy just stroll into my daughter's life, pretending to be family. I was gonna get to the truth, even if it killed me inside. 2 days after I set up the cameras, I got my answer. I'd come home from work a little earlier than usual, hoping I might catch something. I watched the footage in my truck, parked down the street, my hands shaking as I pressed play. At first, it was just Lisa tidying up, scrolling on her phone, normal stuff. But then, like clockwork, the back door creaked open. There he was, this guy Tommy, all smiles, acting like he belonged there. Lisa welcomed him right in, hugging him like it was the most natural thing in the world. What got me though was Jessie. She came running up squealing, "Other daddy," and jumped right into his arms. He swung her around, laughing, telling her how much he missed her. I felt a twist of anger and heartbreak like I'd never felt before. My own little girl, my whole world, had been lied to, wrapped up in this mess. Lisa had let her get attached to this guy, like it was nothing. When the video moved to the living room, I watched as Lisa got cozy with him on the couch, right there, in plain sight of my daughter. Jessie sat in front of the TV, oblivious, watching cartoons. They whispered and laughed, and at one point, he leaned over, planting a kiss on Lisa's neck. She didn't even flinch. I realized this was their routine, something they'd been doing long enough to feel comfortable right under my nose. I knew then I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I had everything lined up. That night, lying next to Lisa in bed, I could feel this tension building up in me, this mix of anger and hurt that was hard to keep down. She was right there, close enough to reach out and touch, but she felt like a stranger. I was barely holding it together, just trying to keep from exploding. But I knew I had to stay calm, had to keep pretending until I had everything in place. I kept watching her, studying all the little habits I'd once found endearing but now seemed hollow. How she'd laugh too hard at some TV show, not noticing I was hardly even in the room. How she'd go to bed with her phone clutched in her hand, tucking it under her pillow as she drifted off. I couldn't unsee the way she'd smile at her phone screen, that little secret grin that probably had nothing to do with me. The picture was getting clearer, and it was like a slow punch to the gut every time I thought about it. 2 days later, I decided it was time to check the footage again. I waited until Lisa and Jessie were out, gone to one of Jessie's playdates. Sitting alone in my truck, parked just a few blocks away, I pulled up the feed on my phone and started watching. I'd been hoping for more proof, something that would make everything completely undeniable. And boy, I got it. This time, the cameras caught a lot more than just some innocent-looking kisses. There was Tommy, sprawled out on my couch like he owned the place, flipping through channels on my TV. He had his feet up on the coffee table, drinking a beer, my beer, and acting like he lived there. A couple of minutes later, Lisa walked in from the kitchen, holding a bowl of popcorn, giggling as she sank down onto the couch next to him. They cuddled up like it was some romantic getaway, not my family's living room. Then, as if to push every boundary, they went even further. I could barely stand to watch as he pulled her closer, their conversation dropping to whispers I couldn't quite hear. It was almost as if they forgot there was a camera rolling, or maybe they just didn't care. They were too wrapped up in their own little world. The worst part came when they brought up Jessie again. Lisa was leaning against him, her head on his shoulder, and she said something about how happy Jessie was to see him, how much she looked forward to their visits. Tommy laughed, saying how he loved being her other daddy. It felt like they were trying to turn my own kid against me, little by little, making it seem like he belonged there as part of my family. I sat there, boiling with rage, feeling more helpless than I ever had in my life. When the footage ended, I just sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I couldn't shake the image of Jessie calling him her other daddy, the way she looked so comfortable around him, like he was part of her life now. This was more than betrayal. Lisa had brought him into our home, right in front of our daughter, acting like this was normal. I felt robbed, not just of my marriage, but of my role as Jessie's father. I knew what this meant. I couldn't just confront her and expect a clean ending. Lisa was too deep into this, and Jessie was wrapped up in it too. If I wanted to protect my daughter, I had to be careful, had to think ahead. Anger wasn't gonna solve this. It would just make it worse. So I put the phone down, took a long deep breath, and told myself that I was gonna see this through. For Jessie's sake, I'd keep my mouth shut and act normal, at least for a little longer. Over the next week, I was like a ghost in my own home, just watching and waiting. Lisa didn't notice a thing. She'd still laugh at her phone, still throw those little "I'm too busy" excuses when I'd suggest family outings. I'd smile, nod, and go along with it, acting like the same old husband who didn't have a clue. But behind the scenes, I was putting together everything I'd need to walk out of this mess with Jessie by my side. During my lunch breaks, I'd go over to my lawyer's office, showing him the footage, talking strategy. The lawyer laid it out plainly for me. Lisa had shown she was reckless enough to introduce a random guy into our daughter's life, even letting Jesse call him daddy. According to him, that wasn't just infidelity, it was a threat to Jesse's stability, maybe even her safety. If we can prove that this relationship has affected your daughter emotionally, he told me, then we can build a strong case for full custody. He advised me to start keeping a log of everything Jessie said about this other daddy, all the little comments and questions she'd bring up innocently, thinking she was just talking about her day. Every time Jessie mentioned Tommy, it felt like another twist of the knife, but I knew it was important to have proof that this guy was invading her life, making her confused about who her real family was. Then, something big happened that almost pushed me over the edge. One evening, Jessie came up to me while I was fixing a leaky faucet in the bathroom. She had this innocent, serious look on her face, like she'd been thinking about something big. "Daddy," she said, tugging on my sleeve, "when are we gonna get a new house?" I stopped what I was doing, looking down at her. "What do you mean, sweetheart? This is our house." She shifted, looking at her shoes. "Other daddy said we might move to his house someday. He said it's really nice, and he has a room just for me." I had to bite my tongue to keep from cursing right then and there. I felt my blood boiling, but I managed to keep calm for Jessie's sake. I knelt down to her level and took a deep breath. "Listen, Jessie," I said as gently as I could, "you know I'm your daddy, right? No one else. This is your home, and you and I aren't going anywhere, okay?" She looked up at me with big eyes, nodding slowly. She didn't completely understand, but she seemed reassured. That was all I needed right then. After she ran off to play, I sat there on the bathroom floor, staring at the tiles, seething. This guy wasn't just sneaking around with Lisa, he was planting seeds in my daughter's head, trying to make her think she belonged somewhere else. That was it for me. I was done watching and waiting. This was no longer just about my marriage. This was about protecting Jessie from being pulled into whatever sick fantasy Lisa and this guy had cooked up. That night, after Lisa went to bed, I went through her phone one last time, making sure I had every message, every piece of evidence. I backed up everything and sent it to my lawyer. He called me the next morning, saying I had everything I needed to make a strong case for custody. It was time to go on the offensive. I knew I couldn't do this quietly. This wasn't just between me and Lisa anymore, it involved our family, our friends, and most of all Jessie. I started planning how I'd confront her, but I wasn't going to do it alone. I was going to bring in the people closest to us, make sure she couldn't twist the truth or pull any more tricks. I wanted witnesses. I wanted her to see how many people were about to learn the truth. I wasn't going to let Lisa take my daughter away from me, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let Tommy or anyone else play the part of her father. Once I had everything lined up, I set the plan into motion. I called up my parents and Lisa's, asking them to come over for a family discussion. I kept my voice calm, made it sound like no big deal, just something we needed to talk through as a family. I also reached out to Lisa's sister, who's always been close to us. I wanted everyone there to see the truth, no room for misunderstandings, no space for Lisa to spin a story to cover her tracks. The night before, I barely slept, lying there thinking through every word I'd say, imagining every possible reaction. Lisa had no clue. She kissed me goodnight and drifted off, peaceful as ever, while I lay there feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders. I was about to blow up the life we'd built, no way around it. But it was already gone, really. She'd torn it down, not me. The next day, my parents arrived first, followed by Lisa's sister and her husband. Last were Lisa's parents. I could tell they were confused, whispering to each other in the foyer, glancing around, trying to figure out what was going on. Lisa looked uncomfortable too, but she played along, greeting everyone with her usual smile. Once we were all seated in the living room, I stood up, took a deep breath, and started. "Thanks for coming, everyone," I said, looking around the room. "I know this is a little unorthodox, but I wanted everyone here for this. There's something I need to bring to light, and it's not easy for me to say. But I owe it to Jessie, and I owe it to myself to tell the truth." I turned to Lisa, who looked like she was starting to catch on. She gave me this tight smile, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Lisa," I continued, keeping my voice steady, "for the past few months, you've been bringing someone into our home while I've been at work. You've been seeing him behind my back, letting him play house with our daughter. Jessie calls him her other daddy." I could hear the shock ripple through the room, small gasps, Lisa's mother's hand covering her mouth. Lisa's face went pale. She opened her mouth, stuttering. What are you talking about, Tom? That's crazy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Crazy? I thought so too. But I set up cameras, Lisa. I have footage of you and him here, in our home with Jesse. I looked her square in the eye, and for once, she couldn't look back. I played one of the videos for everyone to see, nothing too graphic, but just enough to make it clear what was going on. The silence was deafening, and you could feel the betrayal hanging thick in the air. Lisa's dad looked down at his hands. Her mom had tears streaming down her face, and her sister just stared at Lisa, mouth open in shock. Do you understand what you've done? I asked her quietly. This isn't just about you and me. You brought Jessie into this, made her part of your affair, let her think this guy was some kind of father figure. How could you do that to her? Lisa's defenses kicked in, and she started to get angry. You had no right to go through my things, to set up cameras. This is a violation of my privacy, she spat, standing up. Privacy? I shot back. What about the promises we made? What about Jessie? You let another man play dad to our daughter under my roof, in front of her. I'm done, Lisa. I've got everything I need to file for divorce, and for full custody of Jessie. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Full custody? You're delusional if you think a judge will grant that. I'm her mother. That may be, but you've shown reckless disregard for her well-being. I've got the proof to show it, I replied, feeling a strange sense of calm. Jessie deserves better than this, and I'm going to make sure she gets it. The room was silent. Lisa's parents looked devastated, her dad refusing to meet her eyes. Her mom tried to comfort her, reaching out to hold her hand, but Lisa brushed her off, still glaring at me. You set this all up, didn't you? She hissed. You made me look like the bad guy in front of everyone. You did that yourself, I said. I just showed the truth. Lisa's sister spoke up, her voice shaky. Lisa, how could you do this? To Tom, to Jessie? What were you thinking? Lisa just shook her head, crossing her arms and looking away, refusing to answer. I finally turned to the rest of the room. This isn't easy for any of us. But I needed you all to know the truth. Jessie deserves a safe, stable home, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to give her that. With that, I looked around the room one last time, seeing a mix of sadness, anger, and disbelief on their faces. My parents came over, putting their arms around me in support, while Lisa sat alone, the weight of her choices finally sinking in. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sliver of peace. I had done what I needed to do to protect Jessie. Now, I just had to see it through. Lisa didn't say another word as everyone filed out of the house. Her sister threw her a look of disappointment on the way out, and her parents wouldn't even look at her. My parents gave me a pat on the back and a hug, quietly telling me they'd support whatever came next. After they left, Lisa and I were alone in the house. She sat down on the couch, looking drained, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. The anger I'd been holding on to for weeks, the pain, everything had finally spilled out, and I felt clearer than I had in ages. So what now? She asked quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I stayed calm, looking her right in the eye. Now, I file for divorce. And I'm fighting for full custody of Jessie. I'll make sure she's safe, away from this mess. She looked like she was about to protest, maybe to throw some more accusations my way, but she stopped herself, just staring at the floor. For once, she seemed at a loss. With nothing left to say, I headed up to the spare bedroom. I shut the door, leaned back against it, and took a deep breath. Finally, it was done. The truth was out, and the people closest to us knew the full story. There was no going back now. The days after the confrontation were tense, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Lisa and I barely spoke, moving around the house like strangers who happened to share a roof. Jessie picked up on it, of course, her little face crinkling with confusion as she watched us. It broke my heart every time she'd ask, "Daddy, why's Mommy so sad?" Or "Are you and Mommy still mad at each other?" I'd just kneel down, brush her hair back, and tell her everything was going to be okay. I didn't know how else to explain it to her yet, so I kept it simple. Daddy and Mommy are working through some things, but no matter what, I'll always be here for you. She'd nod, hug me tight, and go back to her toys, but I could tell she felt the tension. A few days later, Lisa's lawyer contacted me, confirming that she'd received notice of my divorce filing. I knew she'd come back with a fight, but I had the evidence ready and witnesses on my side. Still, seeing it in writing made everything feel real. This was happening, and there was no turning back. That evening, as I was tucking Jessie in, Lisa knocked on the doorframe, lingering there with a look I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. She looked lost, vulnerable even. "Can we talk after Jessie goes to bed?" she asked quietly. I nodded, keeping my tone neutral, but my guard was all the way up. I knew enough not to let my guard down with her, not now. Once Jessie was asleep, we went downstairs. Lisa looked like she'd rehearsed what she wanted to say, but when she opened her mouth, the words seemed to get stuck. Finally, she spoke. "Tom, I don't know how this happened. I never wanted things to turn out this way," she said, looking down at her hands. I don't know, I thought I needed something different, but I was wrong." Her voice cracked, and she covered her face for a moment before continuing. "But I don't want to lose Jessie. You know I love her, right? She's my world." Her words were a mix of desperation and regret, but I stayed firm. "If she was really your world, Lisa, you wouldn't have risked her well-being like this. You wouldn't have let a stranger act like he was her father, right in front of me, right under my nose. You had chances to stop this, to come clean. But you didn't." She didn't deny it, didn't try to shift the blame. She just nodded, her face a mixture of shame and sorrow. "You're right. I know you're right. I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, Tom, don't take Jessie from me. I'll do anything to keep her in my life." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. "Lisa, I'm not trying to hurt you. But I won't let you mess with Jessie's life like this. I'll agree to supervised visits for her sake, but I'm fighting for full custody, and I won't back down on that." She sat there, stunned, probably realizing that I wasn't going to budge. Her shoulders slumped, and a tear slid down her cheek. "I guess I don't have a choice, then." After that, she went upstairs without another word. I sat there in the silence of the empty living room, letting it all sink in. I'd won the first battle, but the real fight, the one in court for Jessie's future, that was just beginning. But now, I was ready for it. I'd made my decision, and nothing was going to stop me from doing what was best for my daughter. In the weeks that followed, Lisa moved out and got a small apartment nearby. It wasn't far, but for Jessie, it might as well have been a different world. On our first weekend apart, Jessie kept asking when Mommy was coming home, her little voice full of confusion. "Mommy's not staying here anymore, sweetheart," I told her gently, kneeling to her level. "But she loves you, and you'll still see her. Things are just going to be a little different now." Jessie's big eyes filled with tears, and she grabbed onto me, burying her face in my shoulder. "But I want things to be like they were," she whispered. I held her tightly, feeling the ache in my chest, trying to keep it together for her sake. The first visit with Lisa was set for a Saturday morning, with a family friend acting as the supervisor. I didn't want to let Jessie go, but I knew this was part of the process. She clung to me, not understanding why I wasn't coming with her, and it tore me apart. But I forced myself to smile, reassuring her that she'd be safe. After they left, I felt this strange emptiness in the house. I'd gotten used to Jessie's voice filling up every room, her laughter, her little questions about everything. With her gone, the house felt hollow, a reminder of everything Lisa's choices had cost us. I ended up pacing, checking my phone every 10 minutes, just waiting to hear she was okay. A couple of hours later, the call came, saying the visit went fine and that Jessie was ready to come home. I drove over and picked her up, feeling this rush of relief when she ran to me, wrapping her little arms around my neck. In the car, she seemed quiet, looking out the window, lost in thought. "Did you have fun with Mommy?" I asked gently, trying to gauge how she was feeling. She nodded, but her face was serious. "Mommy cried a lot," she said softly. "She said she was sorry. She said she missed you too." I took a deep breath, not sure how to respond to that. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and they feel really sad about it," I said carefully. "But no matter what, both Mommy and Daddy love you very much, and will always be here for you, okay?" Jessie nodded, looking a little reassured, and reached over to hold my hand as I drove. For the rest of the night, she stayed close, wanting extra hugs, asking me to stay with her until she fell asleep. I could tell that even though she didn't fully understand, she sensed that things had changed for good. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the quiet, thinking about the road ahead. This was only the beginning of adjusting to a new life, a new routine. There'd be more questions from Jessie, more explanations I'd have to find the right words for. But I knew one thing for certain: I'd be there for her every step of the way. I'd make sure she felt loved, safe, and grounded, no matter what. This was our fresh start, and I was determined to make it a good one for her. Over the next few months, Jessie and I settled into our new life together. I threw myself into being the best dad I could, filling the house with routines and small traditions to keep her feeling secure. Saturday mornings became pancake day. I'd let her mix the batter and toss chocolate chips into the pancakes while she chattered about her week. It was messy, and I'd usually end up with flour all over the kitchen, but seeing her laugh made it all worth it. Lisa's supervised visits continued, and I kept things civil for Jessie's sake. But each time she came back from a visit, she'd be a little quieter, a little more withdrawn. It was like she was caught between two worlds. After one visit, Jessie asked, "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" The question caught me off guard, but I tried to stay calm. "Why do you ask, honey?" She shrugged, tracing little patterns on the table with her finger. "Mommy said you're mad, and that's why you don't want her to live with us anymore." I felt a surge of anger, Lisa's words, twisting things in Jessie's mind, but I pushed it down, determined not to let it show. "I'm not mad at Mommy," I said softly. "But sometimes, when grown-ups go through hard things, they have to live in different houses for a while. It doesn't mean I'm angry or that you did anything wrong." Jessie nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't fully understand, but she seemed to accept it for now. I knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd have questions, but I was prepared to answer them honestly, in a way that wouldn't make her feel caught in the middle. Meanwhile, the custody hearing was drawing closer. My lawyer felt confident that we'd secure full custody, given everything I had on record. But I knew Lisa wasn't going to go down without a fight. The few times we'd crossed paths at drop-offs, she'd give me these looks, like she was preparing to make her case, to claw her way back into Jessie's life, no matter what it took. One evening, after I'd put Jessie to bed, I found a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lisa. She'd handwritten a note, pouring out her regrets and asking if we could find a way to compromise for Jessie's sake. She wanted more visits, more time with her, a chance to start fresh. I stared at the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to feel compassion, to believe that maybe she'd realized her mistakes. But I couldn't forget everything she'd done, the lies, the betrayal, how she'd brought another man into Jessie's life and tried to replace me. I wasn't about to let her use a few words on a page to change everything. I tucked the letter away, deciding not to respond. I'd let the court handle it, let the judge see the evidence of her choices and decide what was best for Jessie. I had no interest in going back to the way things were. For now, my focus was on Jessie and on giving her the life she deserved. One free from confusion, from instability. I was all she needed, and I was determined to make sure she never had to question that. The day of the custody hearing came faster than I'd expected. I had everything ready, the footage, the texts, even a record of the conversations Jessie and I had about the other daddy. My lawyer went over our plan one last time, reassuring me that we had a strong case. But as confident as I'd been, sitting there in that courtroom made everything feel a lot heavier, a lot more real. Lisa sat across from me, looking worn down and tense. When the judge walked in, she sat up a little straighter, putting on a calm face. But I could see right through it, she was nervous. She knew I had the evidence, and this was her last chance to make an impression. The hearing started with my lawyer laying out everything. The videos, the messages, the times Lisa had introduced Jessie to Tommy, even letting her call him other daddy. He spoke about the emotional toll it had taken on Jessie, how she was struggling to make sense of it all, and how it was Lisa's actions that put her in this confusing place. Lisa's lawyer tried to counter it by painting her as a loving mother who'd made mistakes, but was willing to change. They claimed she was in counseling, that she'd been reflecting on everything, and that her only wish was to be involved in Jessie's life. Lisa even started crying at one point, her voice shaky as she told the judge how much she missed being with Jessie, how she wanted a second chance. The judge listened quietly, taking notes, nodding here and there. I couldn't read his expression, he didn't give anything away. But when he looked at me, I felt like he understood. Like he saw right through the tears and the pleas, to the facts and evidence laid out in front of him. When it was my turn to speak, I told him about the changes I'd seen in Jessie, about the moments when she'd come home from Lisa's place confused or upset. I talked about the routines I'd put in place to help her feel stable and safe, how I was doing everything I could to make sure she grew up in a home that was calm, loving, and secure. After that, there wasn't much left to say. The judge took one last look at both of us, then told us he'd make a decision soon. We all left the courtroom in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer with the news. I'd been granted full custody of Jessie, with Lisa limited to supervised visits until she could prove she'd made real, lasting changes. I hung up the phone, barely able to process it. I'd won. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd protected my daughter. But the victory felt bittersweet, like I'd just closed a painful chapter of my life that shouldn't have had to happen in the first place. That evening, I took Jessie out for ice cream. She didn't understand the court decision, of course, but she could tell I was happy, and that was enough for her. We sat on a bench outside the shop, watching people pass by as she ate her cone, swinging her legs and chattering about school. In that moment, watching her smile, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The storm was finally over. In the months following the custody decision, life settled into a calm routine for Jessie and me. It was strange at first, like I was still expecting another fight, another twist. But day by day, that tension started to fade, replaced by a quieter sense of relief. Jessie adjusted quickly, maybe quicker than I expected. I'd worried about her reaction to the new schedule, the supervised visits with her mom, but she handled it with resilience. On the days Lisa was scheduled to see her, I'd drop Jessie off with our family friend, who supervised, and pick her up later. At first, she'd come back a little quiet, sometimes asking questions about when Mommy will live with us again. I'd answer as gently as I could, reminding her that even though Mommy didn't live with us, she was always close by. Gradually, though, those questions slowed down. Jessie seemed to accept the new normal, and she filled her days with school, friends, and our routines. We spent afternoons at the park, laughing and playing, and evenings making dinner together, where she'd tell me all about her latest favorite show or a new friend at school. She was healing, and so was I. One weekend, I decided it was time for a fresh start for both of us. I found a house a little further out, a place with a big yard where Jessie could play and where we could both make new memories. It wasn't far from her school, so it wouldn't be a huge change for her, but it felt like the clean break we needed from the past. When I showed her the house, her eyes lit up. "This is our new home," she asked, excitement sparking in her voice. "Can I pick out my room?" I laughed, nodding. "You bet. We can paint it any color you want." Watching her race from room to room, planning where her toys and books would go, I felt a surge of hope, like this new place was a symbol of everything we'd overcome. On move-in day, we spent the afternoon unpacking boxes and setting things up. When we were finally done, we sat on the floor of the living room, eating pizza straight from the box. Jessie looked up at me with a big smile. "Daddy, I like it here. It feels happy." I looked around the room, still scattered with boxes and half-assembled furniture, and felt that same happiness she was talking about. This was our space, a place where we could build something new together, free from the shadows of everything we'd been through. As I tucked her into bed that night in her new room, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Jessie was happy, I was at peace, and for the first time, I felt like our life was finally moving forward. We'd been through the worst of it, and now, standing on the other side, it felt like there was nothing but a new beginning ahead. Settling into the new house brought a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Every corner of the place was ours to shape, to make new memories in, and it felt like a clean slate. In the evenings, Jessie and I worked together to unpack and arrange things just right. She'd pick spots for her stuffed animals and books, and I'd let her make decisions, even about where to hang the artwork. There was something special about giving her that control, watching her make the space her own. One night, as we were putting up pictures in the hallway, Jessie stopped in front of a framed photo. It was from years back, a beach trip when she was little. She was right between me and Lisa, holding a tiny shovel and laughing like she was on top of the world. "Daddy, why don't we take pictures like this anymore?" she asked, her voice quiet and thoughtful. I knelt down beside her, feeling the weight of her question. "Well, sweetie," I began gently, "sometimes families change. But that doesn't mean we aren't still a family. You'll always have two people who love you very much, even if they're not in the same picture anymore." She looked up at me, studying my face for a second, then nodded, like she was accepting it, even if she didn't fully understand. "So, I'm kind of like a part of two homes." "Exactly," I said, smiling as I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And you know what? That makes you extra special because you get the best of both worlds. That seemed to satisfy her. She smiled, her big brown eyes lighting up as she moved on to tell me about the sparkly unicorn stickers she wanted to put on her new door. I listened, feeling a rush of relief that she was adapting, that maybe things were making sense to her in her own way. A few days later, we hosted Jessie's first playdate at the new house. She invited Sophie from school, and they spent the afternoon exploring every inch of the backyard, laughing as they made up new games. They built a secret fort out of sofa cushions in the living room, complete with snack packs and juice boxes, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of joy at hearing her laughter fill the house. She was finding her happiness here, and that meant everything. When Sophie's mom came to pick her up, she looked around, smiling. "This is a beautiful place you've got here," she said. "I can see Jessie loves it." "Thank you," I replied, smiling back. "It's been good for both of us, I think." After Sophie left, Jessie ran over and gave me a big hug, her face flushed from all the playing. "Daddy, I love our house. Can we have more playdates?" "Of course, kiddo," I said, ruffling her hair. "This place is for you to make memories in, and you can invite friends over any time." That night, as I was tucking her into bed, she gave me a sleepy smile. "Daddy, I like it here. I feel safe." I leaned over, brushing her hair back and kissing her forehead. "I'm so glad to hear that, sweetheart. This is home now, our home. Just you and me." She wrapped her little arms around me and hugged me tight, whispering, "I love you, Daddy," before drifting off to sleep. I stayed there a little longer, watching her, feeling that deep peace that comes with knowing you're exactly where you need to be. This house was more than just a new place. It was the foundation for everything I wanted to give Jessie, a life where she'd feel secure, loved, and free from all the chaos of the past. Finally, it felt like we'd made it to the other side, and I could see a future filled with light and laughter ahead of us. As the months passed, our new life fell into a steady rhythm. Jessie and I had built routines that were all our own, little rituals that made each day feel special. On Sunday mornings, we'd make pancakes from scratch, Jessie in charge of mixing while I handled the flipping. And every Thursday night, we'd settle in on the couch for movie night, complete with popcorn and whatever Disney movie she was excited about that week. These small traditions grounded us, a reminder that we were building something lasting. Jessie was thriving. Her teachers would tell me how she'd blossomed in school. She was more outgoing, raising her hand in class, always quick to make friends. Hearing those words felt like a reward I hadn't even realized I'd been waiting for. All I'd wanted was to give her a stable, happy home, and seeing her grow confident and happy told me we were getting there. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Jessie in the kitchen, proudly stirring a bowl of batter. She'd gotten out all the ingredients herself, flour scattered across the counter, a look of concentration on her face. "Look, Daddy," she said, grinning. "I'm making brownies all by myself." I laughed, pulling up a chair to watch her. "You're doing a great job, kiddo. Need any help?" She shook her head proudly. "Nope. I know what I'm doing." But a second later, she spilled half the bowl onto the counter, giggling as she tried to scoop it back in. Watching her, I felt this warmth rise up in me. Seeing her happy independent was all I'd ever wanted. As we waited for the brownies to bake, she curled up next to me on the couch, tucking herself into my side. After a moment of quiet, she looked up at me thoughtfully. "Daddy," she said, "do you ever feel sad?" The question surprised me, but I didn't shy away from it. "Sometimes," I admitted, wrapping an arm around her. "But I have you, so I feel happy more than anything." She seemed to think about that, then nodded. "Me too. I miss Mommy sometimes, but I like it here. I like it with you." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I'd worried that maybe she'd feel the loss of her mom more than she let on, that maybe she was holding back. But hearing her say that, feeling her hug me tighter, made me realize she was healing too. We spent the rest of the evening together, eating her messy, delicious brownies and laughing at a cartoon she loved. By the time I tucked her into bed, I felt a deep contentment, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Jessie was safe, happy, and our home was finally filled with the kind of warmth and laughter I dreamed of giving her. As I closed her door and looked back at her, curled up under her blankets, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. We had our home, our life, and each other. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. The seasons began to change, and with them, so did our lives. Autumn arrived, bringing crisp air, golden leaves, and the promise of new things. Jessie and I made the most of it, diving into every seasonal activity we could find. We picked apples, carved pumpkins, and went on long walks in the woods near our new home. It was the kind of simple happiness I'd once taken for granted, but now, every moment felt precious. One Saturday, Jessie asked if we could have a family day. She wanted to bake, make crafts, and go on a little adventure. The way she said family day caught me off guard, something so small, yet it hit me hard. Despite everything that had changed, she felt that she and I, just the two of us, were a family. It was one of those moments that stayed with me, reminding me how far we'd come. We started the day baking cookies, the kitchen a mess of flour and sprinkles as Jessie decorated each one with her own special touch. Then we moved to the living room, where she insisted on crafting paper turkeys and leaf garlands. Our decorations may have been a bit lopsided, but she was so proud, taping them up around the house. By the time we headed out to the park, it felt like we'd turned our home into a cozy little world of our own. At the park, we spent hours exploring the trails, stopping to collect the brightest leaves and the biggest acorns we could find. Jessie found a stick she deemed the perfect hiking stick, and she marched along beside me, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. We laughed about everything and nothing, making up stories about the animals we might see in the woods, her imagination running wild. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over everything, we made our way back to the car, tired but happy. Jessie sat quietly on the drive home, her head resting against the window, and I could tell she was deep in thought. When we got back, she helped me put our collection of leaves and acorns in a jar on the mantel. It was a simple thing, but watching her carefully arrange each piece, I realized how much these small traditions meant to her, and to me. They were a reminder that we'd built this life together, one memory at a time, filling the spaces left by everything we'd been through. Later that night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with that same thoughtful expression she'd had in the car. "Daddy," she whispered, "today was the best family day ever." I felt my heart swell, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I think so too, kiddo," I said softly. "We'll have lots more of them, just you wait." She smiled, closing her eyes as she drifted off to sleep, her hand still clutching the leaf she decided was her favorite. I watched her for a moment, feeling that familiar grounding peace that had become our new normal. As I closed her door and stepped back into the quiet of our home, I realized that we'd found something far more valuable than I could have ever imagined. We had a home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Whatever had happened in the past, it was behind us now. We had our own version of family, and it was whole, just as it was. For the first time in a long time, I felt certain that everything was exactly as it should be.
Bye.